Welcome everyone to this special VMR session this Thursday. Welcome, welcome. We're so excited for this special session. For those of you that are just tuning in, my name is Priyanka. I just graduated medical school from UCSF, and I'm going to be staying here for residency in internal medicine. I just want to go ahead and introduce the special session today. So today we will not be doing our usual case discussion in morning report style, but instead we'll be having an incredible conversation with the mathematician and the magician, Rabih and Reza. And we will be asking them questions and asking them to reflect on how they continue to learn and process all this information as they are engaging with things like VMR and real patient cases. I think that all of us who have been involved in clinical problem solvers and listening to the VMRs and the podcast episodes can agree that we learned so much from all of these tools. And we also could reflect and be better about how we continue to learn, store, and process this information. And so no better than to learn from the experts here, Rabih and Reza. And I love that their names are switched. It's confusing me, but I love that. So yes, I think it is.
I'm about to give you a schema to the hangnail. My name is Rabih.
Look at
oh
all
my gosh.
I'm no longer bald, y'all. Look at that. Look at that magic.
Oh my gosh. Perfect. Well, I want to go ahead and also say that this episode would not have been possible without some amazing learners and CP solvers who have contributed to this special session. So I'm going to go ahead and popcorn it to Gurleen to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Gurleen. I just graduated medical school from Albany Med and will be starting internal medicine intern year at Brigham in a couple of weeks. So I'm really excited to be here and get a sneak peek into the brains of Rabih and Reza. Thanks for joining. I'll popcorn it over to Maria.
Thank you, Gurleen. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria. I'm a medical student in Guatemala, and I'm super excited to be here. I'm interested in neurology and all things clinical reasoning, thanks to Rabih and Reza. I'll be scribing today. I'm not sure what that entails, but I'm really happy to be here. And I don't know, Sukriti, do you want to go next?
Hi everyone, I'm Sukriti. I'm going to be an internal medicine resident soon, and I've also been part of CP for a while, and I feel like at this point, no matter what the topic of discussion is, I find myself quoting Rabih and Reza or just referencing something that I learned from them. So like everybody on this team, I've been counting down to this episode. Also, I'll encourage everyone to feel free to discuss and participate in the chat, and we'll try to have Rabih and Reza answer as many questions from the chat as we can. And with that, I'll popcorn it to Gabriela.
Hey everyone, so I'm Gabriela, I'm from Brazil, and I finished my residency in neurology last February. And I'm very excited to be here. I don't know what is going to happen, and now I'm going to pass to Chiara.
Hey friends, I'm so happy to see you all today in this special session. And I'm Chiara, I'm from Peru. I just finished my medical school, so I am now an MD. And in the future, I will be pursuing internal medicine. And yeah, I'm so happy to listen Rabih and Reza and Rabih. I don't know which order, and I'm confused, but I'm so happy. And so, hi, Kirtan.
Hello, myself Kirtan. I am a final year medical student from India, and I am so excited to be here today. I mean, we don't say Rabih and Reza as mathematician and magician for no reason, right? I mean, they are called that for a reason. So I can't wait for them to weave the magic in the air, and let's get started.
Awesome. What an amazing team. So Maria, you're welcome to share the amazing slide that you made to scribe on. So today we're going to like cover broadly 3 topics, active learning, storing information, and then really reflecting on this journey. And I wanted to start off just kind of discussing and having Rabih and Reza reflect on something that's come up a lot in VMRs and the podcast, which is this phrase called doing a cognitive autopsy. And I know that during reflections, like you both kind of say, like when doing a cognitive autopsy, but honestly, like I would love to know what that means. And like, what does it mean when you actually do a cognitive autopsy? And how is it different or the same when you do that for like a VMR case versus like a real patient case?
Go ahead, Rabih.
I don't know what to do with all this brilliance that I have. All of a sudden, I'm ready to unleash a schema to the cognitive autopsy. Hello, everyone. Priyanka and team, thank you all so much for hosting this session. I think it's an important one. And to all 64 members, hello, and thank you for being here with us. To answer your question, Priyanka, I think the best way to answer it is through an example. And the term cognitive autopsy, we first learned from Gurpreet Dhaliwal. I don't know if he learned it from someone else, but it's literally doing an autopsy on your thinking. And you don't only need to do a cognitive autopsy when there's a mistake. You should actually do a cognitive autopsy as frequently as you can, because it's through reflection that you actually improve your clinical decision making. And to give you an example, there's a patient that was transferred to the hospital I was working at with lower back pain and fever. Of course, this combination brings to mind osteomyelitis, discitis, epidural abscess. He had received an MRI at the neighboring facility. There was no infection whatsoever. And when he arrived to our facility, he was saying that he still had back pain, but he was ready to leave the hospital. So I was planning for discharge. There's only one component of his case that we couldn't explain, and that was the white blood cell count of 15,000. And I said, that's okay. Like, let's get him out of the hospital. But the infectious disease doctor said, no, repeat the MRI scan. Overnight, he was taken emergently to the OR for an epidural abscess and osteomyelitis. Now, this would be one of those scenarios where a mistake was made, and maybe Rabih can share one where a mistake is not made, yet you do a cognitive autopsy. And what I learned from that is that, one, if the timing of the GAD is not, optimal, you may miss infection in the spine. Two, if the MRI is done too early before the infection starts showing itself, you may miss evidence of an infection on the MRI of the spine. Three, like a persistent leukocytosis in someone with back pain should make you pause for a second before discharging the patient. So this was an example of a cognitive autopsy in the context of a real patient encounter. But I'll stop talking and pass the mic to Rabih to comment on further.
It's always a joy to hear Reza dive into the math. The reason he's called the magician is he can whip out a story for every one of the reasons. He can whip out a story to illustrate a point like no other. I have to tell you, it's such a joy to be sitting here and to be part of a session that is led and created by the dream team of the CP Solvers team members. I mean, you all are just absolutely magical in what you do. And I want to be the first to say it out loud, which is I cannot wait for a certain period of time to pass at which you'll have student members interviewing you on this very platform. And maybe I can be the scribe for that so that Maria isn't nervous.
But not anytime soon, Rabih.
Yeah, not anytime soon. What I'm gonna answer your question is to tell you something personal about me, which is that I love my family, and for my family, I'm on salad duty. What that means is I'm responsible for making salad almost every night. Now, making salad can seem easy, but the seasoning is very tough. So, you just chop things and put them together, but how you season it is very complicated. And let me tell you, sometimes you can make an egregious error, an error so obvious that you don't really need to think hard about it. Once I accidentally poured so much salt from the other side of the salt, not the part with the little holes, but like the whole thing. Major error, significant complications to the people who are eating the salad. But I will tell you, I've never made the perfect salad, ever. There's no such thing as the perfect salad. Sometimes, you could have used a little of this, you could have done this, you could have done that, and this and that I'm using because I don't have enough creativity to actually insert specific examples about what you can do. But there's no such thing as a perfect salad. And again, there are egregious errors that everyone will agree about that lead to harm to me and others. But sometimes, you make a good salad that's not perfect. Maria thinks there is a perfect salad, but there isn't. So a cognitive autopsy is a reflection on how you could perfect the salad with the illusion that there is a perfect salad, but there isn't one. Meaning that even if you did everything right and things went well and everybody enjoyed the meal, could you do it better, different, yummy next time? Yeah, you could, for sure. So the idea of a cognitive autopsy is please reflect on your salad making if you poured a shit ton of salt. Excuse my language. But also there's an opportunity to make a different salad the next day from a different perspective. So a cognitive autopsy is the 2 minutes that I take every time I make another salad. Be like, you know what am I going to do differently this time? And how is it going to taste? Doesn't have to be better. It could be just a different angle, a different perspective, a different seasoning. But the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more ways you can season your salad that are equally good, the better off you are. Are you hungry, all? If you are, forget salad. Have some donuts. Crunch with me. All right, I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, thanks, Rabih and Reza, for sharing the term cognitive autopsy. Jumping off of that, I know we've talked about and heard you guys mention deliberate practice and how I think Rabih mentioned 2 to 3 hours to learn more about it. So I was wondering if you could share what you do to learn from pieces. I know out there's like textbooks, there's journals, now there's a lot on Twitter, podcasts, YouTube. So how do you balance that traditional education materials with digital education? And for people coming into residency or transitioning into new parts of their career, what advice do you have to balance those two aspects and be able to have deliberate practice and learning from what we see on the wards and on VMR?
I can kick us off. I don't know, Gurleen, if you want to, just because I know this is on the podcast, if you want to re-ask your question, because I think your internet was choppy at the beginning. I'll leave that up to Priyanka, since I know she's leading this recording effort. Priyanka, what do you think?
Yeah, Gurleen, if it cleared up towards the end, so if you don't mind just rephrasing your question, that would be great.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay, yeah, so I was wondering if you could share about your activities of deliberate practice every day that you use to learn from cases that you see on the wards on VMR. I know there's a lot out there in terms of textbooks, journals, Twitter, YouTube, and podcasts. So how do you balance using those traditional methods of education with other digital aspects? And for incoming interns or people transitioning into new parts of their career or education path, how should we go about to balance those resources?
I think that's a fantastic question, and I think the devil is in the details for sure. And maybe I know Reza has actually on this platform shared his specific tools of deliberate practice, and I can just tell you that I think it's important to ask yourself, well, what is going to drive you? Because we'll talk about what you do and how you can execute the actual action, but you're not going to do anything to much significance unless you're driven to do it, right? So I think the first step is what motivates you to do it in the first place. And then the next question is how do you actually practically go about it? And I think the motivation is just for you to be authentic in what makes you hungry. Sorry, I was going to keep talking about food. But like what really after a case conversation is your stomach churning for? And you could reflect deliberately on many things, but if you're driven to reflect, you will find yourself carving out a solution to the practicalities of how you do it. So how do you stay motivated? I think you stay motivated by finding a very deliberate line. You can be too motivated and eat the whole buffet, in that you don't really know what you're looking for. And so you try to just like dive into the whole world and understand everything that was part of a case that you didn't understand. And 10 hours later, you've accomplished much less than you would have otherwise, because you just stuffed yourself with content, but didn't really focus on it. But you also, on the other end of the spectrum, have to be hungry a little bit. If you have no appetite, you're not going to learn anything. So how do you generate the amount of curiosity that will actually result in the highest return on investment? And I think that's when you have to be practical about how much time do you actually have. And when you're an intern, you're going to have much less time than the time that I have now. So be realistic about how much time you can dedicate. And then when you have that time, really ask very specific questions about what you're going to learn. I'm going to learn the clinical manifestations of leptospirosis and learn the differential diagnosis of things that can look like it, period. Because what's going to happen is, as soon as you start to learn about leptospirosis, you might find yourself learning about jaundice again and going through a jaundice schema and distracted in a whole different corner of the world. So my advice to you is the fuel to do the what has to be calculated and selected beforehand. Don't pretend like you have all the energy in the world. You have to have some energy. And then how do you use your energy wisely? Know exactly how much time you want to commit to something, and then make sure that you come out of it answering the very specific questions that you asked. This is how we effectively communicate and teach. What are your learning objectives? And these are, what are your self-learning objectives, and try to make them as realistic as possible. And then I'll pass the mic to Reza to reflect on, well, okay, now that you have those things in mind, how do you actually go about doing it?
And I'm going to turn into an interviewer. And I have a follow-up question for you, Rabih, because I think one of the most transformational things in terms of my learning came from your recommendation to use some kind of electronic filing system. And I'll just share with the audience why I converted to Evernote, but I'd love to hear from Rabih how he uses Evernote and how it's so beneficial for him. And it's never too late, it's never too late to pick up new skills. But I had accumulated, 400, 500 schemas during residency, all on pieces of paper. I spent hours and hours reflecting my thoughts. My partner, who's not on this podcast, this VMR, so I can speak freely and openly. There's only 2 times I've ever been upset with Liz. Once was when she spilled coffee on my schemas. On all my schemas, there was coffee, and I had laid it out in my house trying to air dry it. I still have those pieces of paper. And whenever I get upset, I just become quiet, and people can recognize that. And the second time was when she put a small dent in my new 2 Series BMW when I was in Baltimore, because she drives a Honda Pilot that is sort of like half the size. So she went a little too close to the wall. Not that I'm thinking about it 4 years later, but who knows? But Rabih, how do you use the Evernote?
How do I use the Evernote? I was going to reflect on that, then I realized, you know what, we're just going to end up talking about our lives outside of medicine. How do I use Evernote? The value of Evernote, the value of technology now is that you don't have to erase, or you don't have to look for your notes. I would encourage you to find some electronic resource to store your content in, because it can serve as an external brain. So what Evernote or OneNote or similar tools like that allow you the opportunity to actually have your notes accessible from your computer, wherever you are, really. And they allow you to constantly update your knowledge without having to erase and find new paper and whatnot. So it's just much more efficient. And you know what Evernote is immune to? Coffee. So even if you spill coffee on your Evernote, you can find it elsewhere on another device.
And I'll just add really quickly to that, like when I email friends, subspecialist questions that I can't find online, I literally take their email response to that specific question and I upload it in a file on Evernote, because I don't want 5 years to go by and be like, man, I remember I asked this person this question. Let me go look at my emails and never be able to find that email. So like in real time, when I get the response, I upload that, I update the Evernote.
I have a follow-up to the Evernote topic. How do you organize your Evernote? And And how do you organize it in a way that makes sense clinically, but also like when you're trying to search something easily? Because I also feel like my Evernote is just a complete mess and it's a reflection of my brain, like the chaos. And I really want to be intentional about organizing it better.
You know, I think I would grant yourself a little bit of license to allow your organizational process to reflect the depth of your understanding of medicine, which will grow naturally. So I think your Evernote or your notes, whatever they are, will serve as an external source of how your brain is organized. And honestly, you'll see that they'll feed back off each other. The more reflection you do and the more time that passes, the more experience you have, you'll find that you're inclined to organize things differently. So I have not invested any deliberate effort in organizing my Evernote beyond what my natural tendencies are when I think and reflect. And if I organize it a certain way in my mind because of clinical experience and practice, I find my Evernote reflecting that. So in other words, I think that you can allow yourself the creativity to allow your brain to grow and your Evernote to reflect it. And so the only deliberate work there is to update your external brain as your internal brain understands medicine in a different way.
So I'm gonna do like a follow-up question as well. I suspect you have a schema about how to do a good schema, but could you talk a little bit about how a good schema is made and what are your pieces of advice for doing them?
Gabby, this is a really good question. And it highlights the point that each schema is personal to the person creating the schema. Yes, there are some core ingredients that makes a schema, broadly applicable, but it's really how does your mind store information and how easily can you retrieve that information? And that should be the basis for you creating a schema. And remember, the schema isn't something that you do once and it's over with. It's something that you'll update throughout your lifetime as a clinician. To give you an example, we had a patient, Rabih, when did I share this story about the migraine? That wasn't with the VMR crowd, right?
No. I forget.
Okay. So once I was taking care of a patient, 80-pound weight loss in a year, right? 80 pounds. This patient had abdominal pain and none of us could figure out what was going on, but we knew something was there, like had lost so much weight. And then Gabby, you'll be interested to know that one day the patient developed a headache. And by the way, the schema we used for that case was image negative abdominal pain, thinking about all of this stuff from AIP to adrenal insufficiency to angioedema and functional abdominal pain, you name it, we thought about it. A neurologist was consulted and said, this patient has a migraine, start anti-migraine medication. We started the anti-migraine medication and all of a sudden the abdominal pain resolved. The patient gained back all the weight he had lost. And that's when I became familiar with the diagnostic entity abdominal migraine. I wasn't familiar with it prior. So then I had to go update my schema for image negative abdominal pain to include abdominal migraine. Now, I think the core elements of a schema, and I would love Rabih to comment on this, because I think Rabih truly is the master of creating these schemas. One is base rate of disease. Like, it doesn't make sense to have a schema on abdominal pain start with acute intermittent porphyria. It makes a zero sense because that's so rare, many of you will not see it. So base rate of disease, like you want your schema to capture like 90 to 95% of diagnostic possibilities. A second core ingredient of a schema is life-threatening causes. Now, this is obvious when it comes to chest pain, but guess what? The red eye, jaundice, all of these can have life-threatening causes that, like the do not miss causes, should probably be incorporated in a schema. Now, a schema isn't just a diagnostic checklist. It's truly like a 3D representation of navigating through a patient's problem. And you want to make it as 3D as possible So incorporating time course into your schema. Chronic is different than acute, is different than subacute. So I would say the foundation of schemas should be personalized, and you can use CP Solver's content to be the start of it, but you should really transform it so it reflects nicely in your brain. It should include base rate, most common diagnoses, do not miss diagnoses, and should include the tempo of disease, and should be really three-dimensional, not just check diagnostic checklist. Reza John, anything to add?
Just for the people listening on the podcast, Reza and I have our names reversed on Zoom because we truly are interchangeable, except that he is way more handsome than I.
I would never argue that.
Yeah, agreed. Because you're smarter than that. You know better. So, I think one thing that I think everyone should think about is, should your schema for jaundice include the rare possibility that the patient has cystic fibrosis and a stricture in the common bile duct as a result of cystic fibrosis? So should your jaundice schema contain a stricture from cystic fibrosis? It's true, right? Cystic fibrosis can rarely affect the biliary tract in less than 1% of patients and can cause jaundice through a stricture. So that naturally brings about the question, how much truth do you contain and put on a schema? And I'll tell you, the biggest growth that I've had in my journey is to realize that what Reza just said is actually fundamentally true. You really only should keep your schema to the things that he just outlined: base rate, life-threatening causes, and time course. So how much you put on a schema should be how much you can say effortlessly in 3 or 4 sentences. So my schema for jaundice, when I first made one, actually included a stricture from cystic fibrosis. But now I'd say my schema for jaundice is I approach jaundice by dividing it into direct and indirect hyperbilirubinemia, and each of those two has a separate schema. My schema for direct hyperbilirubinemia is to localize it as to whether it's intrahepatic or extrahepatic, and each of those has a separate schema. And then so on and so forth. Why? You have to be savvy about how you store information in your brain. And medicine is too daunting for you to be able to swallow the whole salad in one bite. So slice up your tomatoes fine, my friends. And that's my advice. My advice is resist the temptation to inhale. Instead, have your meal slowly, surely, and in a very manageable manner. And for each of you, that's going to be different. For me, my brain prefers very small bites. And I think that's the way we all are headed with how much our attention span can hold, really. So my advice is keep them very short. And the shorter you keep them, the more you realize what the critical junctures are. It's not critical to recognize that this patient with jaundice could have cystic fibrosis from a stricture with the moment you meet them. It's actually critical to know if it's direct or indirect. So I think that's the journey that I've been on, and still am on. Make them shorter and shorter and shorter, and hopefully sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. Just like these donuts, crunch, they're really, really good.
I thought you were going to say just like my brother, Rabih.
Oh, yeah.
Like my brother, Rabih.
Hold on. Can we do that again, Priyanka? I'm just kidding.
Edit out.
Yes, so maybe I can go next. So amazing reflections so far. Now I wanted to ask you one very amazing thing that you have mentioned numerous times before, that whenever we learn something new, then we have to incorporate that into our pre-learned patterns of disease recognition. But let's say you learned that pruritus can be a manifestation of hypothyroidism, right? So now let's say you learn that, and in future you come across such case or such symptom, then how do you ensure that you don't forget that information that you remembered many years back at a critical time? Because that is what it counts, right? So how to make sure that we don't forget that?
There's so many different ways of remembering what you learned before, but honestly, for me, it's of course like going over what I had retained, but also I think coding it or remembering how you learned it in a certain way. And I think, I don't know whether Reza realizes this or not, but you never forget stories. If I remembered the way and the story of like, oh, this professor taught me this association with hypothyroidism and pruritus, I'll never forget it. So, I will take that question. I will actually, I will actually ask Reza, how does his mind retain these very memorable stories? And is it something that's deliberate, or that something that comes naturally to him? Because for me, Kirtan, it's trying to make the initial memory as memorable as possible, such that you're inclined to recall it over and over again. And I think there's no better joy in recalling than recalling a story. That's what it comes down to me.
Kirtan, thank you for this terrific question. And I don't know whether to call you Rabih or Reza. I'm going to call you Reza. Brilliant reflections, Reza. You're so smart, Reza. I'm sorry for the sirens in the background, but I think that Rabih is spot on. So you can learn medicine, you can read a book and try to learn medicine, but it's almost going into a vacuum. And I'm sure many of your attendings, colleagues have told you this. But what happens when you learn medicine in the context of a patient? What happens? All of a sudden, you have the face associated with the disease. So I can vividly recall my patient who couldn't comb their hair because they had polymyalgia rheumatica, and I gave 40 milligrams of prednisone, and the patient was, jumping up and down. Kirtan, I had a patient I just took care of with cervical radiculopathy, had tried all sorts of medications from Tylenol, ibuprofen, Dilaudid, lidocaine patch. Nothing helped. And he couldn't even sit in his bed as I was talking with him. I gave prednisone. And what is the moral here? Always give prednisone when you don't know what's going on. I'm joking, Kirtan, don't do that. I gave prednisone and the patient was doing jumping jacks. How did I know to give prednisone? Because I had another patient with sciatica that I consulted the orthopedic service and they couldn't do the injection in the hospital. They recommended some steroids. And that patient, like within a day, went from not being able to move to being able to move. So my answer to you is that when you learn medicine in the context of patients and you make that associate, like you're learning, thinking of the patient, you're not going to forget. You really won't. And the second best to learning in the context of the patients is when you go to a report or you come to a VMR session and you hear like Rabih share an approach or share a pearl, then you won't forget. And then the thing is to share it with as many people as you possibly can, with as many. Anyone who's willing to listen to you, Kirtan, you tell them. And even if they're not willing to, try to sneak it in until they tell you to be quiet, because that happens too. But the more you repeat the story, the more it becomes part of your neural network. And you're just trying to strengthen the neuronal connections, which I want to put Reza on the spot to talk about his approach to NMJ disorders. I'm just joking.
I was just going to say, Reza, I love that you said that. And I don't want to put Kirtan on the spot, but I just want to highlight that I feel like he already does that. I feel like he already in conversation will be like, and I learned this, and like, I want to share it with you guys. And so I love that. And also just to echo that this community is an awesome space to like find the audience to share these pearls with, and then to help them retain in our own brains better.
Priyanka, Kirtan sent me a Twitter message the other day saying, hey, I wish I could get into the brains of you and Rabih. But I sent him a message saying, Kirtan, it's actually the opposite way. I wish I could get into your brain. So I agree with you 100%. A star for sure.
Well, thank you so much. That was amazing reflection. And talking about that brain thing, I mean, really, it is other way around for sure. Trust me, you don't want to get into my brain. You will start killing the patients if you get into my brain.
Kirtan is so modest. I can ask some questions. So going back, like in real life, Rabih and Reza, what is your process while dissecting a complex case? So you find like your appropriate schema, you collect the clues, create a new schema or a Venn diagram. How you solve a complex case in real life?
Kiara, thank you for asking this. I'm going to tackle this. And it seems like we have a pretty good question in the chat, Priyanka. I don't know if you're monitoring the chat, but I think when it comes to complex cases, like relying on schemas is very helpful. But let's say you look at your schema and the answer is not there. What to do next, right? Of course, you'll read up to date, you'll read journal articles, but here's where crowdsourcing, I think, is the key. Crowdsourcing, because collectively, we are smarter than any single individual. So when I hit a complicated case, when I have a complicated case, and you don't need to go to the people that are the best of the best. It can just be whoever the group is that you're surrounded by. Share the case with them, reflect with them, and try to see what thoughts they have. Because I promise you that if you're going to get an answer to a complicated case, it's through group thinking. And like, so for me, when I encounter these cases, I reach out to Rabih, I reach out to Gurpreet, and I get their assistance and I get their help. And I would present the case at Morning Report to get more doctors and nurses and everyone thinking about the case. So my answer to your question is through group thinking, collective intelligence. It's just important to know where you've reached your limits and being aware of what that limit is. So then you can tap on your network of people.
Rabih, Reza, I think Anne Rosa had a really great question, and just to introduce her to everybody in the audience, we first met Anne at a global VMR. I think none of us have forgotten her since. So I'll let her introduce herself, and then ask her question. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you would like to ask the question for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you so much. My question was sort of about like how to sort of retain that information and create that story when first trying to like encode it when you don't really have patient access, especially in like preclinical years in university. So especially here in England, there's a lot of focus on preclinical and then clinical. So I was just wondering how you would suggest we sort of retain that information without that patient access in medical school. Thank you.
And Rosa, it's great to see you here again. I think it's hard. I think that the preclinical world is essentially a whole different language than the clinical world. And trying to prepare yourself for the clinical world by getting more and more exposure in the preclinical world is just hard. The truth is that, you know, an honest answer to your question is really reflecting on my opinion that the way that the current medical education is set up is probably not optimal in terms of its efficiency and efficacy of getting you to take care of the patient. And the reason that is probably because when people enter the preclinical world, their only destination isn't the bedside. Sometimes their destination is a basic science lab and they're mostly a researcher and they see patients occasionally. And sometimes their destination is a consultant for a pharmaceutical company. So the very people who enter the preclinical mold and even medical school are still actually pretty undifferentiated and end up in many scenarios with the bedside being one of many destinations. And so I think you can certainly take up the ongoing kind of systems change that's happening in this country to push more and more people to clinical experiences in the preclinical realm. But I do think that it's much harder for you to understand a story that is in the clinical domain, which is a different language when you're in the preclinical realm. And so I think unless you're a part of the systems change, you have to be kind to yourself and say, you know what, they're speaking a language I don't understand. And so often what I latched onto in my preclinical years was much more the personal and human journey of a patient. How much they suffered, how long it took them to understand their care, the social determinants of health, so on and so forth. And those can be fuel. In fact, the fuel for me now to keep doing what I'm doing comes from an experience that has nothing to do with the clinical realm. So my advice to you is to latch onto those stories for their human element. And that's probably a big reason why you're doing what you're doing. I doubt that as an individual, you can do something to allow a whole different language to sink in without the system changing or you being exposed to circumstances in an unusual manner. So I think focus on the patient, focus on the person, use the story, no different than friends outside of medicine would learn from them. And the proof of this is Lisa Sanders has these amazing books and stories all about diagnosis, but from a patient's perspective. And you can learn so much about a journey with a tenuous journey in the diagnostic realm, maybe less so about the actual diseases that the patient has, but so much more about their struggles in the healthcare system and so on and so forth. So that's a long-winded way of saying it's hard. Be kind to yourself. And remember that there's a lot you can learn outside the clinical context from these stories.
Matthew has a question. Would you like to go next, Matthew?
Yes, I can. So I have a question for you. At your stage of expertise development, what would you say is the proportion of your time that you spend working on increasing your medical knowledge? For instance, reading textbooks, reading up-to-date, reading articles about specific disease versus the amount of time or energy that you spend working on improving your thinking, improving your approach to specific clinical presentations or clinical problem. Because I find that I feel like I always struggle with balancing my learning time between those two things that I think are essentials, but very different.
Matthew, thank you so much for asking this question. And I think one of the things I enjoy most about these sessions is how international these sessions have become. And we're really one unit. We're all humans. We all are trying to take care of patients better. And that's why we gather together. I think in the ideal world, there would be overlap between the working and the reflection, that it's not two separate processes. That being said, when I'm on the non-teaching service and I have no learners and it's just me and the patients and I'm a hospitalist, I have very little time to reflect and to improve my fund of knowledge. Yes, maybe I'm gaining more experience by taking care of patients, but not necessarily gaining more expertise or refining my thinking. There will be some improvement for sure. And when you first start out, just the encounters with patients, you'll be on this steep learning curve for sure. It's like once you finish residency that it plateaus off, and the goal is to not let it plateau, to continuously be improving. When I'm on the teaching service, however, I'm working, but I have so much more bandwidth to reflect, to improve my fund of knowledge, and to improve my thinking. So how can you overcome this if you don't have the bandwidth while you're seeing patients to reflect? You have to keep track of the patients that are stimulating your curiosity, to then later when you're off to reflect on those patients, because that's going to be much more powerful than reading a case report in NAGEM. That's the second best way to learn, or going to a VMR. But learning in the context of people you've actually taken care of is just so much more powerful, so much more motivating. So my answer to you is this, that ideally, your job would be one where you could reflect and work at the same time. So it's not that you want to be a teaching attending so you go home early. It's that you want to be a teaching attending so you have more space to reflect on the patients. But if that's not possible, Matthew, the next best thing is to keep track, but specific learning goals. Not, I just want to learn about Miss X. That's not helpful. But I want to learn about this specific condition in Miss X. And then all of a sudden you'll be having her face, you'll be thinking about her as you're learning about that specific condition in your time off. So that's when you should refine. It's through reflection that you become better. through reflection. And so reflect on the patients that you've seen and encountered.
I love that. I feel like, this process of reflection is heavily understated in medical school. And so I really appreciate that you both highlight that so much here in this space, because I agree, hearing you both reflect and then like forcing myself to reflect, I can sense like a tangible change in how I engage with the material, because it feels a lot more personal. One of the things that I've heard both of you say, Rabih and Reza and Rabih, is this idea of you being academic soulmates for each other. And, I'm curious what role you think being academic soulmates and having each other has played for you both in becoming better diagnosticians. And what advice do you have for those of us that are sort of launching into a new phase in our careers, or in the future are going to pursue residency, in learning from our peers in that community?
I beat him to the unmute button because he has a knack for trying to elevate other people. And I didn't want to hear him say good things about me before I started. You have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 hands, 2 feet. But you only have 1 brain. And that can be great and not so great sometimes. I think that sometimes you need another brain to do the same thing that 2 hands help you do, and 2 eyes and 2 ears. It helps you see the world with more clarity. It helps you be balanced. And I think that at the end of the day, having somebody else to go through your journey with is something that stereotypically, I suppose, a lot of people try to do in their personal life, right? You try to have a companion or a partner to share life with. And I think when medicine is filled with a lot of discovery and uncertainty and a lot of doubt and a lot of hurdles and challenges. And if you just have somebody that you can go through that with and share that with, it's like no other. And I think in many ways, the Clinical Problem Solvers has been an experience that takes the I and makes it a we. Historically, the NAGM CPS has one discussant, usually a man, who is discussing a clinical reasoning case. And grand rounds with CPSs would have a man usually tackling a case solo. And if you think about VMR never happened. No one is ever alone discussing a case in VMR. And the simplest way to never be alone in medicine is to be authentic with a small group of people, because it's hard to be authentic with everybody, and share your pains, struggles, growth steps, goals, objectives, and anything really. Yeah, I think it is literally impossible to get to the top of Everest without some help or support, without somebody else. And if you want to do that in medicine, you don't have to. You can have your goal be for your career to be a small part of your life, and you focus on your personal life, and you go in, you see patients, you make money because this is your job, and you feed your family and do your thing, and that's it. But if you want your career to be more than that, and there's no judgment, it's either option is equally joyful depending on who you are, then I think you need somebody. And I think all too often in medicine, the doctor especially has been labeled as the hero, the soul, the cowboy, the solo warrior, the ultimate sponge absorber, so on and so forth. And that is just not how people and humans work. On a more granular level, I was showing Reza the apartment that I'm in right now, because he's going to be visiting me in less than a month, right before VMR. And I'm talking about all the shenanigans we will be up to when he comes here. But that's a more practical take on, I think, the deeper truth, which is when you don't have to do something alone, why do it alone?
Epic answer, Rabih John. And I'm going to answer this, and then I'll have to balance because I have to go to another meeting. So again, I want to thank you all so much for having us. I think this was such a brilliant idea to host such a session. I echo everything Rabih said in response to your question, Priyanka, but to give you some specifics, Rabih and I, like, we met during residency. I was 2 years ahead of him, but we didn't become best friends during residency. We didn't necessarily stay in touch once I left to Baltimore to start my first faculty position. So I was on this solo journey, prior to us connecting and really creating CP solvers. So I think I want to highlight the point Rabih said, that you can go on this journey alone. And even if you don't have your significant other, your partner, you can still achieve a lot of joy. And maybe you don't find that person until a decade into your career, until 2 decades, but you're always open to the idea of finding someone. But what happens when you do find someone? All of a sudden, if you were happy, it becomes so much more than just happiness. Like you actually get to live out interdependence and synergy, where you're like, wow, alone, I wouldn't have been able to accomplish that. But together, it's not additive. It's, multiplicative in terms of the impact, in terms of the product that's created. And initially, I thought it was just the product, like CP solvers. But in this process, like I've literally found a brother, a family member. The first person I reach out to when I'm struggling, not only academically, but personally, the first person, Rabih. He's like in my top 3 of people, Rabih, my mom, and Liz. And Liz still is in the top 3 despite ruining my schemas. So but of course, like, Rabih has made me a better teacher. He's made me a better diagnostician. He's motivated me. He's inspired me. But more so than like the product is, like, I really just care about him as a human being, and he really is my academic soulmate. But I just want to say, even if you don't find someone, it's okay. You can still obtain a lot of joy in medicine. But if you do find someone, you'll reach levels that you didn't know existed. Yeah. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Priyanka, for spearheading this, and thanks to all the CP Solvers team members.
Thank you for being here. We're so humbled.
Priyanka, Rabih, would we have time for one last question?
Absolutely. Anything for Alec.
So Alec had a really great question. Alec, if you'd like to go.
Yeah, sorry, I'll try and make it quick. But I was just curious, particularly as a first year faculty, and then how much time you guys spend working on this. A lot more than we see. How you sort of balance your curiosity and staying on on top of this, which isn't easy, with being sure that you stay sort of mentally fresh and recharged away from medicine. I was wondering what strategies you guys use.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, and I think medicine now is fundamentally changing, and I think it's changing very slowly, but more and more so. I think people are allowed to ask themselves, what brings me most joy, and can I just do that alone? I think the word no is being uttered much more in the hallways of the hospitals and the clinics. No to projects you don't want to do, things you don't necessarily enjoy, and so I think that for me has been the biggest way of balancing career and life. And for me, I've really narrowed down what I do to the things I enjoy as much as possible, because I think all of us have to contribute to the maintenance of the structure with which we exist, and that always requires work that I think we don't necessarily enjoy. So I think for me, it begins with saying, well, what don't I enjoy, and how much can I cut off from that? And then slowly but surely, I think we all come to the realization that our optimal reflective self is one that is rested and as healthy as it can be. So before, up until maybe a year ago, I would schedule my life around medicine. I would be like, I have to do this, and this. So during my free time, I will go for a hike. But now it's the other way around. now I've come to the realization that if I want to learn hypoglycemia as the best as I possibly can, because Tiago had an incredible VMR from it, I actually have to go running with my dog at Chrissy Field from after we're done, and then come back and then reflect on hypoglycemia. A year ago, I would, as soon as we're done, reflect on the things that I had to reflect. But now I realize that actually I'm much better at that after I've done the things that give me balance and joy. So my puppy is all harnessed up, ready to go for a run as soon as we're done, and I'll come back and do the reflection. So for me now, I feel like it really is scheduling medicine around my life rather than scheduling my life around medicine. And he's really excited because I think he just heard the word run. He knows what that means.
Thank you so much, Rabih. We are at the top of the hour, and I know Reza is not here, but I think you can also maybe answer this question for him, and we'll close it out with this one. So we've learned so much from you both today, and it's clear that you both have evolved in your process as diagnosticians. But if you were to sort of narrow it down to one or two attributes, what do you think are those attributes that make you a better learner, a better clinician, and a better diagnostician?
I think that it only really is one thing. Medicine is endless and learning is joyful. I think you should always be the MS3. So my advice for you is always be the MS3. And if you are always the MS3, nothing but joy awaits you. Minus the angst of presenting and all that, like you can shed that. But like in terms of how you approach medicine, if you are the eager MS3 who's like, please attending, give me 5 minutes of your precious gold time so I can learn something from it. If you have that attitude towards medicine, towards how you talk to your patients, towards how you approach your attendings, towards how you show up and how you present yourself, if you show up as MS3 who is having a great time on their clerkship, like think back to that, each of you, when you were on a clerkship where everything was just perfect. You were getting you had the perfect team, and you were just learning. If you can get yourself in that space for the rest of your career where you aren't fooled by the illusion that you know more and that you know enough, or you aren't exhausted by the tremendous administrative burdens of writing orders and discharge summaries, or if you aren't overwhelmed by the just sheer amount of navigation politically through the world of academics, and you're just there and you're like, I want to learn and understand the medicine. So yeah, I think that'd be the advice. And you hear that in Reza, you hear his stories. His stories sound like the way I first learned anything. I was like on my clerkship rotation, I was like, oh my God, did you know that this patient with COPD had a COPD exacerbation? That's why they're there. Like that's how he talks about medicine. And so I think if I were to make it as simple as possible, is always be the MS3.
Oh, love that. I think all of us, I can speak for everyone and say that there's so much soul and heart and truth in what you both have shared. I think if we could do this again for another hour, everyone would be super stoked, because truly, I feel this past hour has been magical. Thank you so much, Rabih. It's an honor to hear from you. And thank you again for creating this space and sharing your time. Drew's like, we have tomorrow. That's true. I know.
The pleasure is all ours. This is really this is all a product of love, and it would be literally impossible without each of you, every single one here. But a special shout out to everyone who worked together to make this episode happen, from the folks who joined this call, to the social media team, to the audio editors, and everyone who joined live. It's a delight. And our goal is to learn and understand medicine better so we can make the world a better place. And not to end on a cliche, but I think that's really what drives us all. So thank you for making it happen today, and I can't wait to hang out again tomorrow for RLR.